Good day, I'm Vincent Saxtetter, and this is the After the Age of Fire channel. This is episode 39, recorded April 4th, 2026, Holy Saturday. This episode is, will our energy supply collapse overnight? So, how long will it take for the human race's energy supply to decrease down to where it's going to end up around 30,000 calories per person per day? This is a prepping channel, preparing for the future to help you and your family thrive and flourish and reproduce at a special time in the history of the human race. We're ending about 250 years of doubling every 22 years our consumption worldwide of energy and of many other resources doubled. So at each generation, on average, averaging across the whole world's population, had about twice as much as the previous generation. And that's ending, and at this time, in these decades, and our consumption will come out to a level about half of what it is now. Right now we have about 46,000 calories of energy, most of that from coal, oil, and gas. Only about a tenth of that is from other sources, renewables. And then we have another 15,000 calories of food, fodder, and wood. That's per person per day, averaging over the whole human race. So the total average is about 60,000. Some people, of course, get much less, and other people get far more. And so it'll come down from about 60,000 where it is today down to more like 30,000. And we just finished the first third of the content, and this is the first episode of the next third. The first third of the content was all about, well, much of it was devoted to figuring out how much energy we're going to have long term, and I summarized that in the previous episode, episode 38. It's going to be around 30,000 calories per person per day. Most of that will come from the land, from what we grow on the land, in our forests, our farms, and our pastures. And then the other sources, coal, oil, and gas, nuclear, and all the renewables, will have a supplementary role to what we get from the land. So the first stage in this channel was about our growth and about this limit, long-term limit of around 30,000 calories. And then this episode begins the second stage of the channel, the second of the three parts. And this is about trying to figure out what the end of what the current phase that we're in or will look like, or have we actually started? Have we started the end? Have we stopped multiplying by 2 already? Is that still to come? Are we somewhere in between in a transition from multiplications to something else? And what will that look like, and how can we recognize it? So the basic question is, where are we now? How can we tell? What are the signposts to look for? And the third section of this channel will be about the future. Once this transition is ended, once the era is clearly over, and we're no longer multiplying by 2, and we're down to around 30,000 per person, 30,000 calories per person. What's that future going to be like, and how do you prep for it? How do you prepare yourself, your family line, to flourish in that new future? Still, it will be an extraordinary era, but it'll be different from the era that we're finishing now of multiplications. And there'll also be some thought about what kind of story is the human race in. Is this a tragedy? Is it a comedy? Is it an apocalypse? Or what is it? So that's what the third section of this channel will be about. So all of this, the first and the second sections of this channel, are preparing for the third, which is how to prepare yourself and your family line. So in this section, it'll have two logical phases. One is I'll discuss the mathematical patterns that could occur in our consumption and our economy, however you want to look at it. What are the mathematical patterns that could manifest? So far, in the last 250 years, there's been a very simple mathematical pattern that we've discussed at length. It's the pattern of multiplications, just an exponential. It's called exponential growth, and it's a pretty boring pattern. Every so often, in our case, every 22 years or so, there's something's twice as big. In this case, it was our consumption of coal, oil, and gas, and our consumption of many other things. And it just was a rather boring pattern, very exciting to live in because of this feeling of continual affluence and new possibilities. But in terms of the mathematics, it's just multiply every according to a metronome. So what are but now we're coming to the end of that, and sometime in the next 100 to 200 years, we'll be down to half the amount of energy that we have now. And so what kind of pattern could govern that, the end of the multiplications and the transition into a new era? So I'll be discussing alternative patterns, and then after I've discussed several alternative mathematical patterns that can describe what happens after exponential growth ends, I'll examine whether our current situation matches one or another of the patterns. So our current experience across the globe, does it look more like one or another, or does it look like we're still in exponential growth? So, and just a spoiler, I'll just tell you, summarize the final message. It's that my conclusion is that we're in a particular pattern that's a lot like aging. The growth that we do witness is like the makeup or the prosthetics that an old person might put on to make themselves look still young and active and capable and successful. But at the same time, like any aged person who is relying more and more on makeup and so on, we're running out of momentum right now. And if you look at the amount of energy we have on offer, we have enough energy to keep on multiplying at least one or two more times, so for another 25 to 50 years. Of course, the longer we wait before ending our multiplications, the faster the end will come, or the more severe, I don't know about faster, but more severe the drop will be, because right now we only need to divide by 2. If we double one more time, then we'll divide by 4 later on. So anyway, we have decades before we necessarily have to stop multiplying our consumption of energy and other resources, but already it looks to me, and we'll discuss in depth in the next 20 episodes or so, the signs of where we actually are, and it looks to me like we're running out of momentum already. The reasons for that have to do with the fact that whenever you use energy or any other resource from the earth in a way that's substantially different from how our human race evolved as hunter-gatherers, there are some consequences, and the consequences can be hard to live with. They may be pleasant for a while, but and they may enable you to do amazing things, but they also have some downsides. There are always side effects, and it seems like the side effects are getting the better of us right now. So overall, that's the spoiler summary of where we're going. But we'll cover all sorts of options, all sorts of ways of interpreting the events of the current years, and see which one best matches, which pattern best matches the events that we're seeing. So before in this episode, I'll talk about one particular pattern, But before I get into the different alternative, I'll list the alternative patterns that we'll be discussing in the next few episodes. Let's lay out what we want from this mathematical pattern. It should start with exponential growth. It should start with multiplications, because that's where we've been for 250 years. So that would best match our data, our lived experience. The pattern should start with a regular multiplication every 22 years. And sometime later, the pattern has to end up, the pattern has to take us to 60,000 calories per person per day, which is where we are now, and then sometime after now, it has to end up down at 30,000, at 1/2 of the level that it is now. So, and not be doubling again. So that is the actual data that we have. We have been going through exponential growth. We've reached 60,000, and then I've spent close to 40 episodes arguing that with all sorts of arguments and data that in the end we'll have not 60,000, not twice that, but half that. So that's the kind of pattern that we're looking at, and in it's roughly the pattern, similar to the pattern of somebody like a stunt biker who's accelerated up a ramp and has left the ramp. Okay, so that stunt biker is still going up. As far as we can tell, our economy still seems to be roughly expanding year on year. Never mind the intermittent crashes and stuff that have been happening every few years, every decade or two. But it seems like we're in a period still of growth. But if we are, we're living on borrowed time, and the stunt biker, even though he's still going up, he's in free fall. So pretty soon he's going to reverse course and fall. That's the kind of pattern we're looking for. So there are many mathematical patterns that you could think of to match that data. Okay, and the one I'll be discussing during this episode is the sudden overnight collapse. Just that we very abruptly adjust to the long-term constraint, and suddenly we're at 30,000. In the next episode, I'll talk about the smooth or orderly switch, where it takes time and we do it in an orderly manner somehow. And then in the next episodes, I'll talk about two types of reorganization. One where we somehow consult among ourselves and reorganize ourselves to match the fact that we're no longer going to be multiplying every 22 years and that we're going to have a bit less energy. Or a different type of organization is the kind where it happens to us without our trying to make it happen. It's something that we're constrained to do. But just as many other systems around in our experience are constrained by events, and eventually things pile up and they adjust. Maybe a building collapses or something like that. But it's forced on them and it takes some time. And you can see the cracks appearing long before it happens. Or a fifth possibility is that we'll enter into the new era will be an era of erratic behavior, of ups and downs in our consumption and in our affairs, and that there will be a loss of any sort of predictability, except for that it's never going to go much above 30,000 calories per person per day. So we could just be entering a wild time where it never settles down. We never settle down. So those are the 5 patterns: a sudden collapse, a smooth, orderly transition, type of reorganization where we figure it out and we do it ourselves, a different type of reorganization where it's forced on us, and then just some sort of unpredictable, erratic, chaotic behavior. So I won't actually succeed in telling you exactly which of these must happen. It's a bit different than, I mean, the data that I do have and that you do have is where we are now, what it's been like the last 250 years, and then by now we have a good picture of how much energy we're going to have long term, and so we have to get there somehow. But as for which pattern it will take to get there, well, I'm going to discuss the sudden collapse today, and I'm going to say that no, it can't happen that way. But the other ones all seem to be more or less possible. But then we have to look at, after looking at these different mathematical patterns, then I'll spend some time in the following episodes discussing where is the human race today, looking at the events and the trends in the human race today, which of these patterns best matches our experience, and then we can, instead of by predicting, we'll be looking at it by observation and saying, okay, this is the one that best matches what we're actually seeing. Okay. So with all that said, let's get into the first pattern, which is the sudden collapse, the sudden end. So the idea is that in a short period, say a month or a year or a very few years, our consumption and our affairs will collapse somehow. Not necessarily a total collapse, because it just needs to divide by 2 from 60,000 calories per person per day, where we are now, to 30,000. So it's not a total collapse. The main point is that it would be a single event that would occur quickly and that would be outside of our control. And it would feel like just a disaster. So it would not mean running out of food. We have right now about 12,000 calories per person per day of food and fodder, and another around 3,000 of wood. So even if you lost half of that, you'd still have 6,000 calories per person, and we eat only just a little over 2,000 per person. It would mean a reduction in cattle and meats, probably. But I mean, of course, we could choose, or some of us could choose on behalf of everyone else to take all of the food, or almost all of the food, and burn it for fuel, and therefore deprive some of us of food to eat. But it doesn't necessarily have to happen that way. Okay, a reduction by a half leaves plenty of calories around for us to eat, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the whole world would have to descend into mass mayhem or world war or something. It's not necessary that a division by 2 of our energy consumption would necessarily mean an apocalypse, social destruction and wars and so on all around the world. It doesn't have to happen that way. There's still plenty of calories, much more than we had before all this expansion began 250 years ago. Okay, but in the popular imagination, when we think about an end to energy growth and so on, we don't think about just a reduction by a half. Instead, we imagine that all of our supply of coal, oil, and gas will end, and maybe the whole economy would end suddenly. So airplanes would stop flying, motor vehicles would stop, except for maybe if they happen to be powered by electricity. At the beginning of the year, things are fine. At the end of the year, nobody's driving. There would be no fertilizer. Civilization would disappear, and we'd just cross the threshold and we'd just collapse suddenly, and lots of people would die from famines and wars and so on. That's the popular imagination. So you can think of two varieties of a sudden collapse. One is the one where we divide only by a half, and perhaps we do it without killing each other or letting each other starve to death. And the other one is where we really do completely fall apart and our energy supply goes to zero, and or close to zero, and really the cars aren't moving, and the trains aren't moving, the jets aren't flying, and so on. Okay? And the point of this episode is to say that we should consider this scenario, this mathematical pattern. It's easy to describe this mathematically. It's just as easy to describe as exponential growth. I told you exponential growth is a very simple pattern. This sudden collapse is also a very simple pattern. You just have to say what the time is, and you have to say how far it divides, whether it divides by 2 or by 10, and then you're done. So it's easy to consider this, but it's also very easy to exclude it. It's not what's going to happen to our energy supply, okay? At least not because of a hard external limit on our resources. It could be that because of our own affairs, our own doings, our wars or whatever, we do go through a sudden collapse like this that happens overnight and never recover. But that would be on us. It wouldn't be because of the amount of resources suddenly going to zero, the amount of coal, oil, and gas accessible to us suddenly just running out. That's not the way it'll happen. So I'm not excluding that there could be huge events in human affairs, worldwide events, but they would be because of us. As for the energy supply, it's not going to divide by 2 or by anything bigger overnight. So now it is true that sudden collapses have happened in other resources that we have consumed, okay? But as collapses that happened in a year or so, but those collapses were of species, living species. They weren't collapses of the supply of coal, oil, and gas. A particular species, because of us, failed to reproduce, and so when we came back looking for more of them the next year, they just weren't there. So I'm saying that there are sudden collapses that have occurred and will continue to occur in some of the things that we consume, but the only cases where that happens are where are in living species. Otherwise, things just don't run out in a year. So I'll give you an example, which is the king crab, which is this huge spidery looking thing that can stretch up to a couple feet, I think, at least 2 feet from arm to arm, and the legs taste pretty good. I've eaten some actually, and they grow in very cold waters, and some people really like them and are willing to pay a lot for them. So the South Korean king had its own king crab fishery, and Japan did too, and both of them were overfished and collapsed in the late 60s and early 70s. Then after that, the principal supply worldwide of king crab was from Bristol Bay in Alaska. In 1980, 60,000 tons of king crab were harvested using modern fishing boats with all the machinery, and then it collapsed. It had been ramping up for a while, and then from 1980 to 1983, the amount of king crab available from Bristol Bay divided by 10, and they closed it because clearly the king crab weren't there anymore. So it was 60,000 just from Bristol Bay, and then there were other fisheries worldwide in 1980. and now the worldwide catch is somewhere in the neighborhood of 10,000 to 20,000 tons of king crab per year. So less than a third, maybe a sixth of what it was in 1980, actually maybe a tenth, so a third or a sixth of the Bristol Bay catch in 1980. So there's really much less king crab than there was in 1980. So right now, depending on the year, Bristol Bay may produce 1,000 to 4,000 tons of king crab compared to the 60,000 that was producing in 80. And Russia produces between 4,000 and 7,000, Norway around 2,000 tons. So they just aren't there. These collapses of individual fisheries happened in a period of a year, 2 years, 3 years. And we can talk about other species which have suddenly collapsed, like the snow crabs in the Bering Sea, which collapsed between 2018 and 2021. There was cod that was used to be enormously plentiful off the Grand Banks, the northeastern coast of North America, and they decreased over and over again between 1968 and 1992, and it was finally in the late 80s and early 90s that the fishery completely collapsed. But it had been undergoing collapses before then, but those were the years where it just sealed the bow tied the bow. We can also think of the passenger pigeon, which at one point was so plentiful in the United States that it was considered to be a pest, and people just shot it for fun or for making pies out of, and then abruptly just disappeared and is extinct. Also the Tasmanian tiger, which was abundant, plentiful, and suddenly wasn't there anymore. At least it seemed sudden to us. We didn't notice until it was basically too late. So those are species that have suddenly collapsed, but minerals like coal, oil, and gas and the other things we mine from the earth don't collapse that way, not in a few years. The reason is that, well, there are several reasons. One is we discover more of anything we're interested in every year. It doesn't matter what it is. If we're interested in it, we're always finding more of it. Okay, now what we find more of, whatever it is, say iron or coal or titanium or cobalt, the deposits that we find this year may be more expensive than the ones we found last year, more expensive to mine, and they may be in smaller quantities. And and part of being more expensive is that they may be a smaller percentage of, say, cobalt, so you have to do more work to purify the material, you have to throw away more rubbish, and so on. So we keep finding them, though we've generally found the best already of any mineral, and now we're finding lower grades, and we expect that to continue. And then we leave things in the ground unless we can come out ahead by mining them. So there's a lot of thought that goes into whether the decision whether to open a mine and whether to keep it open, and therefore we don't mine the lower grade, the more expensive things until we've run out of the higher grade, less expensive deposits. So we can talk about running out of expensive of cheap deposits of high-grade coal that's close to the surface, so you don't have to send miners underground, and you can use a single huge machine to extract 1 million tons a day. And those deposits will run out, and then we'll have to make decisions about whether to work on other mines, other deposits that we already know about, but will require more people, more effort, more danger, more machinery, and so on. So, and then, in other words, no matter what the mineral is, we haven't really run out, so to speak. We may be coming close to a point where the price of what we mine will go up significantly. It might double, or it might triple, or it might go up even more. But we don't run out. There's always more. And then another reason why there won't be a sudden collapse is because of the time scales of our mining efforts, which are measured in often a decade or many decades. So there's the time scale between when we discover a new deposit and when we begin working on opening a mine there. Then there's the time period between when we start work on opening the mine and when the mining actually begins, when it begins producing. And then there's another time scale between when it begins producing and when it's finally closed, we've exhausted everything there is to get, and it's time to close the mine. And all of those stages in the life of a mine can easily take years or decades. The whole thing, mines can remain open for centuries. So it's just impossible, considering that our mines don't run out in a year, and then you think about having many thousands or hundreds of thousands of mines around the world, that they would all stop producing, or all our wells would stop producing in a year or 3 years. That's not the way nature works. Now, we might have a collapse where we somehow lose the ability to run our oil wells, or the will to run them. We're too busy dealing with some emergency that we ourselves have created. And then maybe our oil wells could all give out in a year, but that would be on us. It wouldn't be because the oil isn't there anymore. What I'm saying is it'll take us decades for us to run through enough oil, coal, and gas for us to make that transition from the price and the effort that they require now to get to something that's so significantly worse that we'll have to divide our consumption by 2. This will take decades. My guess is it'll take 50 years or more. Perhaps a generation or 2. Okay, so over decades, over 30, 40, or 50 years, we'll see that we're getting less coal, oil, and gas compared to the money and resources and labor that we put in to get them. We'll be sending more people underground. We'll be spending more of our budget on energy. Say, if we want more natural gas, we'll have to build a lot more pipelines and machinery and to handle the natural gas. And over decades, because of all of these things, we'll find that coal, oil, and gas, there's less per person because they're more expensive. And they'll transition into becoming a supplemental energy source, supplementing our supplies from crops and forests. So, because it takes decades for you to run through a mine and close it, and then even while we're closing mines, we'll be opening other ones, and there will be efforts to get maybe the new ones will prove to be more expensive than the old ones, or less reliable, or maybe, as in oil today, the fracked oil that we're pumping now, when you open a fracked well, it produces almost all of its total production in the first 2 or 3 years, and then it's almost done. That's much different from the way that traditional easy oil wells are, that that will produce often for 30 years at something close to full production, and then still be producing smaller quantities for decades after that. So it's a different ball game, and that's part of why fracking is just more expensive than easy oil, because you have to go and drill and drill and drill and drill, and it only lasts a couple of years. So, what I'm saying is, a sudden collapse in our energy consumption could happen, but the reason won't be because of a collapse in the amount, or because we'll run out of the amount. We'll run out of coal, oil, and gas in the ground. Okay, it would be our affair. So an example of what could cause a collapse, and maybe is about to, is the Iran war that's started about a month ago, and in which there's been bombing of oil fields and refineries, and tanker movements have been blocked, and it looks like this could escalate, and there could be more and more and more energy coming offline, energy sources coming offline, and that could cause a real and pretty abrupt drop in our energy supply. Though we're just talking about the energy available from the Middle East at this point. It hasn't turned into a world war yet. Well, at least not into the sort of world war where energy supplies are being closed off worldwide. You can discuss whether this is a world war or not, but whether it is or not, at least at this point, the only places where energy is being turned off is in the Middle East, and that means it's only a fraction of the total energy supply. It's not a half. So this won't reduce our energy, at least if it remains restricted to the Middle East. Even if the Middle East is completely turned to rubble, it won't reduce our energy supply by 1/2. We won't get to the 30,000 calories per person per day, where we will be 100 years from now. This is not going to be as severe as the actual decrease in energy supply, but this could happen really quickly in a year or even in a few months. Whereas the decrease in our total energy supply that I'm talking about, it'll be more severe. It'll be division by 2, but it will take decades. And then when it does happen, it's not necessarily the end of the world. Okay. In fact, half the planet today lives on 15,000 calories per day, plus food, fodder, and wood. That's averaging across that half of the planet. Most of Asia and Africa. That's more than half of the world's population. Asia minus South Korea, minus China, minus Japan, and minus Australia. And then all of Africa, you take that 4.5 billion people, they're living on 15,000 calories per person per day, plus food, fodder, and wood. That means total they're living on less than 30,000. So for them, as long as they can maintain that 30,000, it's not a disaster. Okay. For the rest of us, the rich half of the world, it would mean a large reduction. Okay, and I've discussed that in the previous episode. But it's something that clearly the other half lives on this. Certainly the rest of us the whole world could live on this without us necessarily killing each other or dying of starvation. And in fact, the worldwide energy supply in 1970, only 55 years ago, was about where it's going to be long term. And back then, it was clear that energy supply did not imply necessarily world war or mass starvation, billions of people dying or whatever. You might, at this point, think about watching episode 12 of this channel, which is titled "Less Energy Does Not Mean the Stone Age." It's perfectly possible to live on 30,000 calories and have all the modern conveniences, the universities, the high tech, and anything else you could imagine. You'll just have to deal with a little less easy personalized transportation, and maybe your houses will be you'll have a little lower temperature during the winter, and maybe you won't be buying so many consumer items, and maybe you won't be throwing away so many things after the first use. But it's perfectly possible to do that. It's just a matter of whether we choose to get there peacefully or whether we choose to get there by killing each other. Um, so a halving in our energy supply does not imply that our civilization will collapse, either quickly or slowly. It's perfect. We've lived through many doublings. Who's to say that we couldn't go through one halving? So overall, the message of this episode was, first, I introduced where we're going in this section of the channel. We're trying to evaluate where the human race is now and what that transition will look like from exponential growth, from multiplications to about half our present consumption. See if we can recognize where we stand now, and this episode, and then the other message of this episode is, whatever it is, however it works, it's not going to happen in a year or two or in a month or two. There may be shocks and wars and so on that affect us on that time scale, but our supply of energy, of easily obtainable energy, is not going to affect us that way. It'll affect us over a period of decades. So we have to look at patterns that happen more smoothly, that will run out of energy over decades, not over years. And in the next episode, I'll be looking at the next pattern. I might have an episode about the Iran war, but in any case, the next episode that I'm planning is the pattern of an orderly decrease. Could it happen that our exponential growth will end smoothly, and then very smoothly over a period of decades, maybe a half century, will come to rest down at 30,000 calories, at half of what we are now. So maybe our stunt biker has left the ramp and he's in free fall, but maybe he's going to find another ramp that helps him smooth his way down, and a downward ramp, so that he doesn't just get a big shock when he hits the ground. Instead, he decelerates more smoothly. Could it happen that way? So with that, I thank you, and I encourage you, if you know anybody who would be interested in this content, please encourage them to join and watch, and do keep coming back.